This is Logan Sekulow. Prime Minister Netanyahu says no ceasefire as troops ready for a ground invasion.
Keeping you informed and engaged, now more than ever. This is Sekulow. We want to hear from you. Share and post your comments or call 1-800-684-3110. And now your host, Logan Sekulow.
Welcome to Sekulow. We are taking your calls. I want to hear from you today on a Monday. It's wherever, depending on where you are in the country. It could be Monday morning, could be Monday afternoon, could be the evening. But I want to hear from you. Give me a call, 1-800-684-3110, on your thoughts on all that's been developing in Israel. We are live right now. We have comments coming from President Biden. We have comments coming from Prime Minister Netanyahu as the word is happening that the invasion of Gaza is nearing happening. They obviously called for a mass evacuation. We know that happened over the weekend. And now, though, when pressed on it, especially pressed for some sort of ceasefire, Prime Minister Netanyahu said, well, no ceasefire, ready to go in. And we are finally seeing, as expected, so we're going to discuss this a lot later on in the show, so I want to hear from you too. As expected, a week and a half into this, what's happening? The tide is turning against Israel as they begin to fight back, as they begin to answer the strikes that happened against them. Something that we all expected would happen, whether that's from the UN, whether that is from social media, whether that's from influencers. You could slowly see it start creeping. Now, there's been some holdouts, especially in, you could even say like Hollywood, where you've seen sort of the tide turn a little, but some of the big studios and those all sort of still support Israel. You could see it sort of happening in mainstream media as the conversation starts to move into people becoming experts all of a sudden. I love that when people who have never even thought about this topic are now experts in it, and they know what's best for our country thousands of miles away. But we're going to be taking your calls, 1-800-684-3110. But, Will, this does come on the heels of Prime Minister Netanyahu saying no ceasefire.
That's right. And as you'd expect, the Israeli government and military are ready to launch an attack on Hamas and to try to root out the evil that is in the Gaza Strip, known as Hamas. And the unfortunate tide turn that you talked about as well of world opinion is that whenever Israel is attacked, normally you see a little bit of concern from the Hollywood elite, the media. But then as soon as Israel retaliates or tries to liberate their citizens that are being held hostage or any sort of mission like that, the tide quickly turns and you start hearing these statements about take care to protect civilian lives and things that are a given.
Sure.
The Israeli government doesn't want to go in and just eviscerate human life. They want to take out the threat. But people don't understand the way that Hamas situates themselves among schools, hospitals. They launch their missile attacks from places of worship, from hospital roofs, so that becomes a target. And you can't just allow for the security of your nation that to continue. And the most brazen attempt yet by Hamas to try to launch this type of invasion, where they went almost into an ISIS-style barbarism that we hadn't seen prior, really, in that overt nature of barbarism. We hoped that the world would take notice and know this is who Hamas really is. But unfortunately, we are starting to see around the country, around the world, this anti-Semitism that bubbles over when these things happen, and they start to turn the attack back on Israel.
Yeah, and the conversation continues on. We're going to take your calls. A lot of you are calling in right now. We do have a few lines open. This is a perfect time to get in line, to get your voice heard. I want to know where you sit on the situation in Israel. Look, I think we also are running into, you see it with some presidential candidates, you see what's happening is because of the conversation that surrounded Ukraine over the last year and a half, there is thoughts of people looking at this going, well, we didn't want to get involved in Ukraine. Why we want to get involved in Israel? And that's just a general lack of knowledge on the global scale of what's actually happening here geopolitically, what's happening in the war in general. But I want to hear from you. How do you feel about this? Give us a call, 1-800-684-3110, as the Israeli ground invasion appears imminent. Could be happening at any moment while we're on the air of Gaza. And we also have, of course, the statement from President Biden, who's been surprisingly strong. But guess what? Had a bit of a flub, bit of a backpedal. Shocking, to say the least. Let's go to that when we get back. So you're going to hear from President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu. We'll be right back.
What does it mean to be an ACLJ champion?
Becoming an ACLJ champion means joining us in the fight for liberty, in the fight for law, in the fight for peace, in the fight for freedom.
The battles being fought in courtrooms right now will decide what kind of future our kids will have tomorrow.
So when you join as an ACLJ champion, we now actually have a baseline to know what we can possibly accomplish. And look, the dream is vast.
Being a champion means that you get to come alongside churches who are being zoned out of properties, who are being forced to obtain liquor licenses simply to operate, coming alongside students who are being told they can't read their Bible in school or even bring it.
Becoming an ACLJ champion allows us to take on more cases internationally. In places where Christian persecution is happening on a daily basis. The need for the defense of these Christians is overwhelming, and we can't do it without you.
Becoming an ACLJ champion means getting into a fight with deep state elites who are attacking our school children, who are attacking pro-life Christians.
We have lawyers right now winning in courtrooms across the world, but none of it would matter without the ACLJ champions. Simply put, we don't win unless ACLJ champions continue to step up.
We can't do what we do without you.
By becoming a monthly donor, you can become a champion of life.
A champion of liberty, a champion of freedom.
Please join us.
Please join us.
Please join us. Become an ACLJ champion today.
Welcome back to Sekulow. We are taking your calls, 1-800-684-3110. I think we need to hear both not only from you, but also from the President of the United States, Joe Biden, and from Prime Minister Netanyahu. So we're going to start actually with Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, this was translated from Hebrew into English, so now that, he obviously speaks very fluent English, educated in America, but this was a message to his people. Let's take a listen to this. This is Bite 18.
There will be struggles, there will be obstacles and sacrifices, but we will win. There are many dark forces. Hamas is an axis of evil, so it must unify in order to destroy Hamas.
So you kind of start hearing we've kind of 9/11 flashbacks. We start hearing axis of evil. You start hearing these kind of terms because that's what they're experiencing in Israel. It's very easy for us as Americans to move on and to get distracted. I've seen people send me messages and go, well, Logan, don't you think this is some big distraction? This is another one of those things that's going to keep us not looking at the Hunter Biden laptop and all of that type stuff. And I'm like, I really don't. As much as there are those moments, and sure, are people going to cease on, or are they going to jump on an opportunity to get things out of the news? Of course, that's how politics works. But this is a war that could have ramifications like we've never seen in our lifetime, because this is happening in the Middle East, in Israel. We know where things are headed, and they sat down with President Biden over the weekend to ask him more and more about the potential support of Israel as they begin their offensive strike into Gaza. Really still defensive. I mean, they're still dealing with huge ramifications of what happened last week. But let's hear that. Let's start with Bite 8.
Would you support Israeli occupation of Gaza at this point?
I think it'd be a big mistake. Look, what happened in Gaza, in my view, is Hamas and the extreme elements of Hamas don't represent all the Palestinian people. And I think that it would be a mistake for Israel to occupy Gaza again. But to going in and taking out the extremists, the Hezbollah is up north, but Hamas down south is a necessary requirement.
Okay. Look, everyone knows that, of course, any political regime doesn't represent all the people there. This also is a fundamental misleading of the American people of what it's actually like to be over there. As Will said, this isn't just a government, this isn't just military, this is hiding in, like I said, using human shields, their own people. So you give these warnings to evacuate because we know what's going to have to happen to eliminate Hamas, as, by the way, President Biden said needs to happen. That's Bite 9. Let's take a listen.
Do you believe that Hamas must be eliminated entirely?
Yes, I do. But there needs to be a Palestinian Authority. There needs to be a path to a Palestinian state.
Can we not get there after the war is over here? I understand there is a lot of contention over how the Palestinian people and Israel and the occupations and the territories and all that. And it is very, very complicated. It's not that complicated, to be honest. But they've made it seem very, very complicated to where every person can just say, I don't know, peace, love, that's all we know. I'm not educated in this, as if they were all educated as, the geopolitics of Ukraine and Russia a year ago. But for some reason, for Israel, when there's clear evil, in response to clear evil, for some reason, I don't know, it's innocent lives. We have to protect innocent lives. And I agree, we got to protect innocent lives when there's hostages, when all these things are happening. Also, I'm not someone to just harp on the president and give you all the negatives, but if you listen to that statement, they made a big deal about the fact he seemed exhausted and tired and even expressed that he was very tired. I'm sure he is very tired. The man is in his 80s, and he's dealing with the potential of a World War III happening on his hands. Of course he's going to be tired, but it's just not what we need right now. I mean, I don't want to be that person, but legitimately, there's not many people that I would assume to rather have in that chair right now. It is really a sad state when that's the comments that are come out. Fumbling, mumbling, clearly referencing Hezbollah when he meant to say Hamas, backtracking in his head, getting there because he's exhausted. Okay, I get it. You're exhausted. But now is not the time. We got to show strength here. This would not be happening under even a different, I don't even know if this would be happening under a different Democrat president. I don't know if this would have been happening. I mean, yes, probably maybe under Obama, but Obama was also there saying, hey, we need the pre-47 borders. So, that's a little bit different because he was definitely more of a sympathizer to what's happening, maybe even more so than Biden, probably traditionally, because old school Democrats are pro-Israel and have always been. Your Chuck Schumers and those people. This is not a new thing for them to all of a sudden be pro-Israel. It's just as odd to see. I mean, we have seen people start getting fired from their jobs, whether that's in a lot of, again, like I said, Hollywood, because they're making statements that are considered, they go from pro-Israel to where they'll flip it on them and say they're Islamophobic. That will become the conversation piece. It's no longer you're pro-Israel and you're against the murder of children and adults and mass invasions from a terrorist regime. All of a sudden now you've liked the wrong tweet and your whole career is going to go down. Let's go ahead and take some phone calls. Let's go to Lou, who's actually calling in Israel on line 1. Lou, thanks. You're on the air.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. Just wanted to call in and thank you for all the support that your organization and the Christian community have given us. So we really appreciate that. I just wanted to mention, and you were just talking about President Biden, and we appreciate his words and his support, very pro-Israel, but I personally blame him for some of this situation, partly to blame with his administration funding the Iranians and giving the $6 billion, which because we all know that the Iranians are supporting Hamas and Hezbollah, and without the Iranian money, they couldn't have done all this.
Yeah, Lou, that's a great comment, and one we appreciate you listening or watching, however it is you do online, presumably in Israel. That also shows you, look, I just want to take a second and thank everyone who's become ACLJ champions over the last few weeks, because people like Lou have access to this broadcast because now, thanks to technology, thanks to our friends at Rumble, thanks to YouTube, Facebook, and all those different outlets, we're able to be worldwide. And you get calls worldwide. Pretty amazing to actually see. So, Lou, I want to thank you. When it comes to Iran, you brought that up because that is a situation that has been in the news recently. And they actually responded when they said, well, what happens if Israel goes into Gaza? Will Iran? And they kind of said, you don't touch us, we're not going to touch you. But then they did kind of course, have to throw in some words there that were a little death to Israel-ish.
Right. They did say through their Islamic Republic news agency, they reported that the Iranian UN mission says the resistance front can defend itself. Iran's armed forces will not engage, provided that Israeli apartheid does not dare attack Iran, its interest, or its nationals. So they're on the one hand saying we're not going to be on the ground fighting in Gaza, supporting our proxy group Hamas, but I mean, that's splitting the difference there. You're talking about Iranian-backed Hamas. Yeah. But it does say, provided the Israeli apartheid does not dare attack Iran, its interest, or its nationals. Now, we know historically Iran has advisors from the Al-Quds Force, from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. There are always people there that are helping Hamas in some degree, maybe not declared that they're on this mission, but they are advising, they are weaponizing, they are supplying, they are training Hamas and have been for decades. So that gives you a window of Iran being able to then say, well, we had members of the IRGC there and they were attacked in this. The tinderbox is there. The ability for one little thing to set off a much broader conflict in the Middle East is there. And with Iran making public statements, even if they are saying we're not going to fight there, it's still messaging. It's still putting Israel on notice that, hey, if you mess up, then we will come after you, even though we know from all the reporting that they were helping in planning of this, that we know how much Hamas has been funded and created and developed, and as well as Hezbollah to the north, by the Iranians as a proxy to fight what they call the little Satan, Israel, because their entire mission is to wipe Israel off the map. So them putting out through a propaganda piece at the UN that, hey, we're not going to put our fighters directly on the ground to fight it because we think the resistance, which is Hamas, can take care of themselves. Don't believe it for a minute that that's actually stated policy, that they won't have fighters there engaging in this conflict.
Yeah, and coming up in the next segment of the broadcast, we got Jeff Balaban, who is one of the heads of our office in Israel. We're going to discuss an update from him of all that's going on, and specifically also what's going on in Ivy League campuses. If you've ever heard about this, specifically coming out of Columbia, you're getting praise from Hamas. I had one of my friends who I will remain nameless, who told me that they are currently attending a university and how the barbaric discussions, and I've tried to keep this, I know that people listen with their families, but you know what I'm talking about. Some of these kidnapping murders you've heard, especially with children. They're being told in a lot of these campuses, oh, that's Israeli propaganda. That's not really happening. That's what's being taught. Whether that's being taught or whether that's what you're hearing from your RA, whatever's happening, that's what's going on these college campuses and so much more. We're going to talk with Jeff Balaban coming up in the next segment on that. So stay tuned. Give us a call also at 1-800-684-3110. I want to take the last 20 seconds of this segment to tell you about becoming an ACLJ champion. As you know, we've been dedicated to our support of Israel for decades now. We have an office in Jerusalem and an action around the clock. We've been action around the clock to support them. And I want you to stand with Israel, add your name to our petition at aclj.org. And while you're there, become a monthly donor, what we call ACLJ Champions. Go to aclj.org/champions.
You can see behind me, Israeli artillery units continue to fire on the northern part of the Gaza Strip. The Israelis targeting Gaza from the air and the ground, trying to put as much pressure on Hamas as possible.
Hamas is ISIS, and just as ISIS was crushed, so too will Hamas be crushed. And Hamas should be treated exactly the way ISIS was treated. They should be spit out from the community of nations.
Some of the people were taken back into Gaza from this town when the militants entered Sderot. We do have new GoPro video that was recovered that shows Hamas fighters on the backs of motorcycles as they were entering these areas and taking hostages. The new number we have today from the Israeli military indicates at least 199 people are being held hostage inside the Gaza Strip at this moment.
These hostages, they're going to be dispersed all over the Gaza Strip. And what makes it even more challenging is this is a very dense urban scenario. So a lot of these buildings, they could be hiding in buildings. A lot of them are probably underground in small pockets. So it's a number of issues. The IDF obviously wants to go in and clear out Hamas, but if they start taking out targets, are they going to accidentally take out hostages? And on top of that, Hamas has threatened to kill hostages.
The United States has Israel's back. We will stand with it today, tomorrow, and every day.
Blinken's goals include securing safe passage for Americans seeking to leave Gaza through Egypt's Rafah crossing, working to secure the release of the hostages held by Hamas, and stopping the conflict from spreading further.
Our troops are preparing themselves for the oncoming missions. They are in what we call battle procedure, logistic and operational plans, getting ready for what may be the next stage of this operation.
Welcome back to Sekulow. We are joined by Jeff Balaban, Senior Counsel for International and Government Affairs of the ACLJ, and obviously heavily involved in our office in Israel. But right now, we're going to discuss what's going on in the Ivy League campuses, and specifically what's happening, well, in a piece, or I guess a representative of Columbia had some very interesting things to say, and maybe we need to just kind of give everyone a bit of a rundown before we get Jeff's thoughts. I'm sure he's got them.
Yeah, so this is Columbia University professor, tenured professor in politics and history, Joseph Mossad, and he's previously had some issues with anti-Semitism that's been looked into, so no surprise there. But there's a petition going around from a junior and a former student body president at Columbia asking the university to do something about this professor after he posted on his website or a website called Electronic Intifada that what he saw was a stunning victory of Palestinian resistance against cruel colonizers.
This is a professor, just to clear up. It's a professor at Columbia.
And he also said things like the sight of the Palestinian resistance fighters storming Israeli checkpoints separating Gaza from Israel was astounding. He used words like awesome, incredible to describe the terror that we saw and the atrocities that we saw just last week. And so now there's a student that's got over 20,000 signatures asking for the university to do something about this professor. But it is a sad state of where academia is in the United States.
This is where we are, Jeff. I feel like, look, good for this student and good for these students and people who have signed this petition, because that is honestly not what you'd expect. You wouldn't expect that from what's coming, because a lot of times these students are very much influenced by these extreme, you don't want to say liberal, but extreme anti-Israel, anti-Zionist professors. I'm hearing it from my personal friends who are either in college or work at universities who are afraid to speak up. I have friends who are scared to show any of their support of Israel publicly, are packing their book bags with ballistic protection. I mean, this is really what's happening in these universities because they're scared of just simply the fact of being pro-Israel. But this was coming out of Columbia, but it's certainly not exclusively there. I don't think we have Jeff's audio, so we'll figure that out here. 1 second, Jeff. We'll reset. We good? Are we good, guys? Yep. Okay, good. Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, it's not exclusive to Columbia at all. Columbia, has a huge Jewish population. It's in New York City, so people would think that at least the Jewish students and faculty would feel protected there, but it's quite the contrary. It turns out that in New York, where it's the largest Jewish population outside the state of Israel, there's more campus anti-Semitism here. Columbia was rated as one of the most anti-Semitic universities in America. Others like City University of New York, we know we represent some of their faculty as well. The anti-Semitism is grotesque, and it's not just incitement, but it leads to and has led to physical violence against Jewish students. There are Jewish students who are being urged to not wear yarmulkes, to not visible signs, to hide the fact that they're Jewish. There's an ongoing campaign of terrorizing Jewish faculty and students in academia. And now let's also unpack what he says. He's delighted to see these checkpoints being blown up. What are those checkpoints? Israel does not occupy Gaza. Gaza has been free to rule itself now for well over 10 years. What they've decided to do is turn itself into a nonstop factory for genocide against Jews. That's what it decides. This is a border, there's a sovereign border that they've overrun. So this professor is saying he's delighted at these horrific images of the worst, most despicable, almost indescribable carnage of innocent babies, of women and children, and he's delighted for that. We live in a world in America where people are canceled in universities and thrown out because they read a novel that has a word that offends people, and yet it is open season on Jews.
It's unbelievable. I mean, there are times, like you said, the grotesque nature of this, which has been some of the most horrific things I've ever read, seen. I mean, there are times where I have to turn off the television and go, I can't let more of this into my brain. Knowing this is happening is just incredibly heartbreaking, but to hear that this is what's being spread on college campuses. And look, sadly, if this guy gets fired and they respond to 20,000, guess what? There's another university ready to pick him up because this is not uncommon. Like you said, Jewish students asked to not wear yarmulkes or to hide the fact they are Jewish. This isn't anything new, by the way. This isn't all coming from the war in Israel. This is what's been happening the last decade or so as the infiltration of this movement has happened more and more in academia. It is just amplified to the extreme when now you see the true colors. Now you see when even there is extreme acts of terrorism, they are still out there publicly supporting terrorist regimes to the point of just disgusting nature. And you see it, and I'm following people on social media, and you're seeing the comments come in, and look, a lot of them are bots. I had to remind that to a bunch of my friends who are celebrities who, I deal a lot in that world, and they were getting, they post their pro-Israel, moment, and God bless them if they were willing to do it. A lot of them weren't. And immediately within seconds, they'd have hundreds of Palestinian comments or comments about, the occupation and those kind of things. And I had to remind a lot of them, these are not real people. Go look at them. A lot of these people are bot farmed from who knows where, trying to intimidate people who are just standing up against genocide and against this. And now, as the tide is turning, as we expected it would, and Israel's got to do a better job at this. And I've said this from the very beginning. They got to do a better job, Will and Jeff, at getting their outward PR a little better here to really explain what's happening. I don't know how much more you can when you show people these images, and then the other side says, well, that's it's not the same or it's fake.
Well, that's it. In other words, I'll be honest at this point, Logan, if someone doesn't understand who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, they're basically so morally depraved that it's not even worth talking to them. It's so, this could not be more obvious. This is worse, literally worse than Hitler's Nazis, because they were not broadcasting publicly to the world proudly the images of the slaughter. These are animals broadcasting it proudly. And then here in America, and by the way, let's make this very, very clear, because there are people on the right also who are saying, oh, it's the Jews trying to drag us into a... That's insane. We have unknown tens or hundreds of thousands of people who come over the southern border with the same jihadi mentality. Right. This is a war on our civilization here in America as well. And the universities are providing cover and support for the people who want to destroy us.
Yeah, I really pray that, especially for the right, as you said that, because I have seen those comments come in. I've seen my friends start texting me. They're like, we know you know a little bit more about this than we do, but do you not think that this is, again, them trying to get us into war? Do you not think this is just trying to avoid, whatever's happening in the Biden world? And I have to remind them that this is so much bigger than what they could possibly imagine, that this is not even the situation of what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. Not that it wasn't horrendous. It isn't still continually horrendous, but this is a different kind of fight. This is a world battle that has been going on for thousands of years. And to see my concern, a lot of these conservative influencers have been so kind of desensitized because of Ukraine that now they see Israel and what's going on in Gaza and see it as a similar situation. And so much so that they'll just distract.
Israel has not come to America and said, hey, please fight our war for us. Israel's not and will not. All right? That's not the same thing. The problem is what Americans need to understand. The same people on the right who are concerned about the border or saying we should be concerned about our border, not about Israel. That Israel's not asking you to be concerned about their border. Yeah. Israel is saying, watch out for your border because you don't know how many of these same feral beasts with the same genocidal intent who have said all along that America is the great Satan. America is our ultimate goal. They are now feeling empowered, whether it's in the classrooms in Colombia or it's in sleeper cells waiting. America is already under attack, and America needs to wake up for itself. And let me tell you, America must be on the side of the right and the good here. Because
I'm sorry, Jeff. We are just about to head to, I didn't mean to cut you off at all, but we are just running into the hard break here. Thank you so much for joining us, as always. And look, I'll come back. We have a whole second half hour coming up on this broadcast. Go to ACLJ.org if you don't get it on your local station. Become an ACLJ champion today. We're going to go through a lot more coming right up.
Some people think champions are born.
That it's a title that requires something only a handful can ever possess.
But being a champion only requires a decision.
Choosing what is right.
Even when the loudest voices in the room say it's wrong or that it can't be done.
And then following it through, no matter the cost.
It can be a difficult stand.
But it's one any of us can make, including you.
Including you.
Including you.
Including you.
You can change things. You can make a difference.
You can be a champion.
We can't do what we do without you.
By becoming a monthly donor, you can become a champion of life.
A champion of liberty, a champion of freedom.
Please join us.
Please join us.
Please join us. Become an ACLJ champion today.
keeping you informed and engaged. Now more than ever. This is Sekulow. And now your host, Logan Sekulow.
Welcome back to Sekulow. We are going to take a number of your calls. A lot of you have been on hold at 1-800-684-3110. Let's actually start this segment with a call. Let's go to Mary Ellen, who's calling in Illinois. She's been on hold for a long time. Mary Ellen, obviously we know you've called in often, and we appreciate all your feedback. You're on the air.
Okay. Hi, Logan. Well, first of all, these college kids, what they're spewing out about actually being pro-Hamas, and then, people saying, oh, well, we should hire these people, and, oh, it's freedom of speech and blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, wait a second. We got the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence that guarantees life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Hamas's stated goal is to wipe us off the map, including Israel. So it's an assault on my right to life. And then I think, wait a second. These people are fertile recruiting grounds for Hamas. And Hamas didn't drop off flyers like the Israeli did. So it's like, wake up, people. I think our freedom of speech goes so far to rationality. And we cannot breach that rationality.
Yeah, Mary Ellen, I think we need to actually segue a little bit from what you said about waking up, because this is a very similar to what is happening somewhat on our border, but really just a warning of what could happen.
Right, that's right. So Chris Wray was asked about the situation with Hamas and everything that's going on, and he had a warning that he spoke, which has been something that we've been saying for quite some time, that this is a fertile time for terrorists to take advantage of America not having their eye on the ball in maybe some of the right places for our security. So here's what he said about the heightened environment that we're seeing around these attacks, where Hamas exploited a border, went after soft targets, a music festival. There was just a report that their documents specifically said to target elementary schools and children. So just take a listen to what Chris Wray had to say.
In this heightened environment, there's no question we're seeing an increase in reported threats, and we've got to be on the lookout, especially for lone actors who may take inspiration from recent events to commit violence of their own. So I'd encourage you to stay vigilant, because as the first line of defense protecting our communities, you're often the first to see the signs that someone may be mobilizing to violence. I'd also ask you to continue sharing any intelligence or observations you may have, and on our end, we're committed to doing the same so that together we can safeguard our communities.
And finally, right, that's what we've been saying about the southern border for years under this administration. When we did our FOIA request and found out they were trying to cover up the fact that Yemeni nationals that were on the terror watch list had been captured, thankfully, after they got through the border, but by local police departments out west, that the Biden administration tried to cover that up. Now, if you're talking about exploitation of our southern border, or even cells that may already be here, and people trying to exploit this heightened environment, I think Chris Wray is accurate, that we need to be on the alert, and we should take lessons from what we see in Israel. But my fear also is that then they'll flip this. They'll try to find a way to make this about supporters of Israel. That then there will be people that are domestic violent extremists, and they'll try to add to those numbers again. Because we haven't seen the FBI fully flush out going after the real threats, the real bad actors, and instead they try to turn it back on conservatives.
That's right, everyone. And hey, phone lines are open, 1-800-684-3110. Cece Howell's going to be joining us in the next segment to discuss how this is all playing out at the UN and internationally, as expected. And why you got to stay vigilant. The tide is turning against Israel. We have to be there. You need to be part of it, too. The war in Israel is moving closer to a full-scale invasion. As necessary to root out the evil of Hamas, our office in Jerusalem is working around the clock, and our offices here in America. I mean, we are in constant communication 24/7 about what's happening and what we need to support our friends in Israel, and you can be a part of that as well. We are sending a vital letter of support to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. You need to stand with Israel. Be a part of that right now. Add your name at ACLJ.org. Now, this is just the beginning of the fight. We need your continued monthly support. You can become what we're calling ACLJ champions. That's people that have decided to donate regularly, monthly, at aclj.org/champions. Do it today.
Saw today 3 anti-tank guided missiles fired into Israel from southern Lebanon. The Israelis responding, striking Hezbollah targets inside Lebanon. But yet another indication the Lebanese militant group may try to get involved in this fight, and something that Israel worries about, because if they do get involved at a full-scale level, it is something that will overwhelm Israel's air defense system.
The U.S. is now sending a second carrier strike group that includes the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower in the direction of the eastern Mediterranean, joining a strike group including the USS Gerald R. Ford that arrived last week. This comes amid reports of skirmishes between Israeli forces and Iran-backed Hezbollah along Israel's northern border with Lebanon, something the president warned against when speaking with Scott Pelley on 60 Minutes.
I wonder, what is your message to Hezbollah and its backer, Iran?
Don't
come across the border. Don't escalate this war.
That's right.
Colonel, have you seen signs that Hezbollah is mobilizing to attack you with some of those 100,000 rockets that they have?
Well, so far what Hezbollah has been doing is attacks across the blue line, the border between us and Lebanon. They fired anti-tank missiles. They have attempted to infiltrate and attack one of our positions up in the area called Mount Dov, which is a far area with no civilian population. And they are constantly, I would say, enhancing and escalating the situation, not going above a certain threshold yet. And I think that they can see that we are deployed on the south of the border. We are ready, and there won't be any surprise attacks against Israel this time.
There has been skirmishes along Israel's northern border, and the Israeli towns and cities are being evacuated by the IDF. So there are civilians on the move on both sides of the border. If Hezbollah unleashes a fury of rockets on central Israel, you can expect the Israelis to retaliate, and the Americans will be ready.
Welcome back to Sekulow. Cece Heil is joining us in studio. We're going to discuss about what's going on at the UN and how it relates to Israel. You may have seen there was actually sort of a shocking moment for the UN standing in solidarity with Israel, usually an organization that either is anti-Israel or takes a stance that would be considered that way. But the United Nations broadcasts on the side of where they're building, right? Projected images or on an LED screen, the images of the hostages currently being held by Hamas, Israeli hostages, Americans, and currently we know those numbers are going up and up. I believe there's close to 200 confirmed hostages right now in Israel. And I did want to address that. We'll discuss this also. I know there's been some discussion about Facebook and whether you can share those images that we have been sharing, and whether that goes in violation of Facebook's policy on sharing images of the hostages. We actually had a conversation with Facebook this morning to clarify their stance, and they said, yes, go ahead, that those images are fine. They have some specific guidelines, but the images we've been posting and people like the UN have been posting, and you've obviously seen it all over your news, that those are authorized. They're not going to penalize you. And look, that's some of the work here at the ACLJ. We're able to actually get responses from big organizations and big tech like Facebook. Before they, you're concerned with censorship, well, they actually stood up today and said, no, that's not what we meant here.
Our attorneys worked over the weekend,
to get
drafted a letter to them, got the letter to Meta over the weekend, got a phone call this morning. We're able to get clarification on that, and hopefully there'll be further clarification down the road.
Yeah, exactly. We'll continue to work with them to make sure that these people who are currently held hostages, sure, there are concerns of showing those images, but not of these images, because you have to remind people what's happening. But the UN did this. They broadcast out. We all kind of like, wow, that's a good moment of support. But of course, the tide's turning.
Absolutely. The problem with the UN, and we say this consistently on this broadcast, is the fact that they have more anti-Israel resolutions passed than against any other member state. So we are constantly at the UN supporting Israel. In fact, Jordan just did an oral intervention supporting Israel right before the attack. And as soon as the attack happened, we sent off a letter to the UN Secretary General, and we demanded 5 things. We demanded that he publicly condemn Hamas for its actions, to demand the immediate return of the hostages, to commence a review of all UN funds going to Gaza, and 4th, to publicly affirm the legality of Israel's right to respond to the Hamas attack under the UN Charter and the laws of armed conflict, and 5th, to disclaim any equivalency between Hamas's actions and those of Israel. Sadly, we've seen the UN Secretary General now release a statement, and his statement focuses on two things. Just the humanitarian issue. He is strongly appealing that, one, Hamas immediately release the hostages without conditions, which is good. Yep. The second one was Israel should grant rapid and unimpeded access for humanitarian aid for the civilians in Gaza. Interestingly, and as always happens, Israel is the good guy. They have done that. They have complied. But have we seen Hamas release one hostage unharmed? No, we have not. And really, this is where the Biden administration was totally correct when they said this is not two sides to this. It's one-sided. Israel was attacked, and they have a right to self-defense. And that's what we never see the UN say. They never stand up for Israel and say they were attacked. They have a right to self-defense.
That's right. And unfortunately, it's that that dichotomy that the UN tries to pull out, where there's this false equivalency of two sides, that they're almost trying to say we're neutral, that even though their bias clearly leans with Hamas, but that if you do this humanitarian thing and you do this humanitarian thing, and maybe we can work it all out. But unfortunately, the ones that were attacked and the people who were caught off guard and slaughtered were the Israelis. And when you go into a place that is densely populated like Gaza, there are urban warfare situations. The fact that Hamas is using hospitals, schools, places of worship as places to launch attacks, missiles, rockets. We know that they have expanded their capabilities through their paraglider attacks, them doing things offshore, trying to go around blockades and to gain access to Israeli coastline. They've really beefed up what they're doing and are operating more like what you saw from the Islamic State. It's not the traditional Hamas lobbing some rockets and unfortunately taking Israeli lives and some terror attacks that are sporadic. They have beefed up their operational capacity based off support from Iran. They have beefed up their brutality. And there is nothing about this that is traditional disputed conflict. This is a terror group, a barbaric terror group attacking on purpose innocent civilians. There should be no room for discussion at the UN of this false equivalency between the two groups. And they should be supporting Israel's right to defend themselves and wipe out this terror group that is targeting elementary schools, is the new report. That their marching orders were find soft targets and kill as many people as you can.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and take some phone calls. Let's go to Tim, who's calling in New York on line 1. Tim, you're on the air.
Hey, guys. Good afternoon. Thanks for taking my call. A question after a quick comment. I know that the terrorist nation Iran's working on getting a nuclear weapon. I could swear that I heard when Menachem Begin and Reagan were around that Israel has use, or they do have nuclear weapons. I wonder if they do or not.
Yeah, Tim, I think it's, here's what I would say. I mean, I have no insider knowledge on one way or the other, but Israel's probably one of the most technologically advanced countries on the planet. So take with that what you will. I think that there are certainly, you're talking about a country with one of the strongest militaries in the world as well. So I'm not sure specifically about their programs, but it would not be surprising to me. The difference is, you got to imagine, though, is remember how small of a land this is. The whole country of Israel, the whole thing, you can drive through in a few hours. And if it was like as the crow flies, if it wasn't for the windy roads, you could probably do it in an hour. You're talking about a very small bit of land and surrounded by enemies. And if they're not surrounded by enemies, they're surrounded by people who are not necessarily as sympathetic to their own cause. Certainly not as Western, as we would say, I guess. That's the only way to really explain it is if you go to Israel, if you visit Israel, you'll notice that it certainly has some similarities to being in America. You go to Tel Aviv, it has a strong resemblance to New York City. But obviously you go to Jerusalem, it's very old and ancient and everything, but it's still modern in some sense. Sure, there are very big differences culturally, but a lot of the sort of more traditional, I guess, liberal Western views you would find in Israel. You don't find that in a lot of the countries that surround Israel. So even the ones that are friendly. So whether it's a program, a nuke program, whatever it is, it's not necessarily specific. I don't have specific knowledge of that, but what I know is I've seen their military firsthand, And there's no stronger military, maybe other than our own, the United States, that I would say probably has every sort of ability at their fingertips.
Israel is not a declared nuclear power.
No.
Like, we have treaties with countries around the world about stockpile limitations and things. We obviously, United States is a declared nuclear power. Everyone knows that we have nuclear weapons. Israel is not that. Analysts do believe that Israeli military has nuclear capabilities, but they aren't broadcasting that. They're not telling Iran and until recently Saudi Arabia, which hopefully Saudi Arabia we can continue to get normalization. But they're not telling these nations, here's everything we got. Because when you're the size of New Jersey and you're surrounded by enemies, you don't broadcast, here's every capability we have, because you want to survive. And that is what the Jewish people in the state of Israel have been having to do for history. The entirety of history is they have had enemies surrounding them, weapons pointed at them, and they have been surviving in that land. And when you look at the way that the UN then will take that and try to push back, make it a false equivalency, and you take in the entire concept of all history, it's very shocking.
But for the ACLJ, how do we, as the ACLJ and the ECLJ and everything that's involved in the UN, how do we respond to make sure voices are getting heard? Because people are obviously frustrated, they're concerned, but we do have a voice there.
Absolutely. And we file every single time that we can. And we have petitions that you can sign, and we file and do oral interventions on your behalf. And we're able to show the UN that there are, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that support this position. And I would just point out, too, Israel's military power is not to wipe out and to destroy, like Hamas. That's their intent, to destroy Israel. Israel has a military power and might to simply defend themselves because they are constantly targeted. They are constantly on the defense. And that really is the distinguishing difference, is Hamas is literally targeting them constantly.
Right. Hey, we do have some phone lines open. I'd love to hear from you as we start to wrap up this broadcast. 1-800-684-3110. If you're watching live, if you're watching on social media, Rumble, YouTube, give us a call. 1-800-684-3110. Perfect time to call. Tell us if you are still supporting Israel and how you think America could or should get involved. I'd love to hear from you. And again, obviously, all of the things that are happening on college campuses, maybe you've experienced that as well. Look, the war is getting closer and closer to a full-scale root out of Hamas, and we support Israel in doing that. And our office in Jerusalem and us here at the ACLJ are working around the clock. We could use your support. Go to aclj.org, not only to sign that vital letter of support to Prime Minister Netanyahu, but also to stand with Israel and become an ACLJ champion, a monthly supporter of the ACLJ. Go to aclj.org/champions.
First of all, if you donate any amount ever, we appreciate that so much. But if you're a monthly donor, we want to acknowledge you as an ACLJ champion. You're a champion of life, of liberty, and of freedom. And I just want to take a moment to thank you and personally recognize the important role that you play in the ACLJ. We have 15,000 of you right now, which is fantastic. I want to double that in the next year. So we want to get that to 30,000, and we believe we could do it. And we're going to do it day by day. We're handling the most complex litigation you can imagine. Stuff we never even thought that would be litigated is now being litigated, and we're doing that. But we need you to become part of that team.
It's how we continue to expand our work. It's how we're ready to fight all those 14th Amendment cases all over the country, wherever we need to be. And those are fast-track cases.
I mean, these are complex stuff. 14th Amendment, Section 3, there's not a lot of law in it. We're making law.
These are going to be done before the ballots are printed. So you got to be ready to go all in the moment you take the case, because it's going to be fast-tracked all the way through the legal system. And you can't assume that they're just going to get tossed out of court. You have to assume you could end up at the U.S. Supreme Court.
We bolstered our team. We brought in some of my colleagues that represented the former president.
You need resources to do that. Our ACLJ champions make that happen.
We're about to file a major lawsuit for Charlie Kirk and TPUSA. We're representing those whistleblowers on Capitol Hill. File the brief in the Supreme Court on the abortion cases, religious liberty cases in the United States and around the globe, defending Israel at international tribunals, and defending persecuted Christians in places like Pakistan and Iran.
Our cases take months, sometimes years, and that's why your sustaining monthly donations are crucial. So we need you to become an ACLJ champion today. Go to aclj.org/champions and become a recurring donor at whatever amount you're comfortable with at aclj.org/champions.
So go to aclj.org/champions, and you could join this elite group of our ACLJ donors who stand with us each and every month.
Welcome back to Sekulow. Now is the time to get your comments and calls in. 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. Will, I know you wanted to discuss what was going on as a response from Tom Cotton and what's been going on.
Right. So the Biden administration obviously has been supporting and funding the Ukrainians for quite some time now.
Yes.
And what we had over the weekend was Jake Sullivan, who's National Security Advisor to President Biden, who's very much been pushing for deals with Iran, is very much the kind of the Iran apologist within that group, had something interesting to say. This is Byte 26 over the weekend about funding that he expects to be coming from the White House presented to Congress this week. Let's go ahead and hear Byte 26.
And the president has made clear that he is going to go to Congress with a package of funding for Ukraine as well as continued support for Israel. You can expect intensive engagement with Congress this very week as we work on such a package and seek to secure bipartisan support for it.
So what you're seeing the Biden administration do is tie these two issues together, where Ukraine for years now had been something that had to be put forward. We had to isolate that issue. It couldn't get tied up in other funding battles. That was terrible that the Republicans would do that they had to put straightforward bills forward so that we could get the Ukraine funding that they need to survive. Now you see a war in the Middle East where Israel, we have been funding for quite some time and helping them with their security. They're trying to tie these two issues together.
We know they're prepping thousands of troops, our own troops, to
right.
At least have some sort of involvement.
We know that there was one carrier group sent to the region last week, and there were reports from Lloyd Austin, who's the Secretary of Defense, that a second carrier was being deployed there as well. So that is positioning our military in case of a broader outbreak of conflict. But when it was so much a Ukraine has to be on its own issue, and you see now the National Security Advisor trying to tie this issue in to hopefully, I guess, gain support from Republicans or conservatives to get funding through, it just comes across a little disingenuous, especially with the fact that how much bandwidth the Ukraine war has taken up. And when you're seeing the atrocities that Hamas is doing, I wish that they would show that they could walk and chew gum at the same time and say, we believe in both these issues. We will put them together separately and we will get them through.
But now you got to be, make it sort of a complicated mess here just to support Israel. Let's go ahead and take some phone calls. Let's go to Gail, who's calling in California on line 2. Gail, welcome.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. We appreciate your work. I think one of the problems with the students on the campuses is the way that they're being trained. They don't realize the difference between a Palestinian citizen and radicalized Muslim terrorists. You can look up their plan of action online. They have published it online. They've got a plan to take over the world. They've been trained from the Quran by the imams, and they have a plan to infiltrate the schools, the media, the government, prisons, and they've been doing that for a long time. And so a lot of people are just confused about the fact that there are terrorists and there are citizens living in harmony with Israel and within Israel, Palestinians and other Muslims living in Israel. There's a Muslim quarter in Jerusalem. And so they don't know the difference. And so they need to know that terrorists have to be treated differently than citizens for whom we as believers pray. That's the Muslims, of course, our Lord's people, the Jewish people. We pray for them because God wants to save them all. But there's a difference between terrorists trying to take over the world and citizens.
Absolutely, Gail. I think that you're not necessarily far off from most of your thoughts there. I think that that's a pretty good thought on how the tide has turned over the last decade. Like I said, I think Israel's done a pretty poor job at educating American people. They have let the support of Israel from younger Americans because you're right. There isn't this really understanding of how it works there. I tried to take our entire organization in 2020 to Israel. Obviously, that did not happen. We've been trying to get that back on the books since then because I do believe you have to see it to fully understand it, or at least you have to get really educated on it because it's easy to see the imagery. Look, there are some bad imagery that comes out specifically from these areas, from the West Bank and from Gaza, and you do feel for people. You feel for humanity. Obviously, we're all humans. It's like looking at the border. You know, you see border agents obviously helping people across the border when they get stuck in barbed wire. Why? Because at the end of the day, they're human beings. You do feel for people like that. But it's not the situation over there. If you go to Jerusalem, as you said, there are Christians, there are Jews, there are Muslims, there are pretty much and plenty of atheists, people of no faith structure at all, who all live in at least relative harmony. There are areas that are specifically Jewish holy sites. There are Christian holy sites. There are holy sites, obviously, for Islam, right there in the heart of Jerusalem. And for decades, though there are times when it gets more heated, they've all lived in relative harmony. There's obviously a ton of humanitarian aid also coming out of Israel. Never gets talked about for people in these areas, whether that is in Gaza or the West Bank or any of these territories that, again, as Jeff said, they say are occupied and at this point are really not, are being self-governed. The problem is when they are being self-governed, corrupt leadership takes over. And the difference is, like I've said, the corrupt leadership that comes out of maybe, even if you don't like the politics of Israel or you don't like the politics of America, let's say, you don't like, if you're a Republican, you don't like the Democrats. Democrats don't like the Republicans. Is neither one of them are going to use their own people to blow up, thousands of people and murder thousands of people. That is the big difference here when it comes to when a corrupt political regime gets in charge, they're terrorists.
This is from the Hamas Charter from 1988. This says, the Islamic resistant movement aspires to the realization of Allah's promise, no matter how long that should take. The Prophet, Allah bless him and grant him salvation, has said, the day of judgment will not come about until Muslims killing the Jews, and when the Jew will hide behind stones and trees, the stones and trees will say, O Muslims, O Abdullah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him. This is the charter of Hamas. This isn't a political party that has opposing policy. This isn't a dispute about health care or infrastructure. This is a terrorist organization, a terrorist army that in their foundational document, their constitution, their charter, says that they are seeking the destruction of Jews specifically. Yeah. So there are no qualms about what this anti-Semitic, hate-filled, genocidal group is. And the fact that you do still have people that we have to combat their words is astounding.
It's insane. We've had to spend the last hour for you explaining why you should not support Hamas is pretty ridiculous, to say the least. But as Will said, the statements are pretty loud. Here's the deal. We only got a minute left in this broadcast. First, thank you all for listening and being a part of the show. My brother, my dad, they'll be back here very soon, but just couldn't do it today. So today, we've been hosting. I appreciate everyone who called in, everyone who commented. We want you to support Israel as you have been. And by doing that, you can also support the work of the ACLJ because we have our offices in Jerusalem. And look, we know that the full-scale war in Gaza is about to begin. And our office in Jerusalem has been in action 24/7. And so has our office here. I can't tell you the amount of messages, the amount of texts or calls that I'm getting at all hours of the night. And we are preparing to get you involved as well. You can be a part of this. You can sign this vital letter that we're sending to support to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. They see what's happening in America. They're concerned as well, by the way. Because America is supposed to be the friend, and when they see what's happening in the streets of America right now, it's very concerning. You can stand with Israel. Add your name to that letter at aclj.org. And while you're there, we're just at the beginning of the fight. You need to be involved, become a monthly donor to the ACLJ, or we call ACLJ Champions. Go to aclj.org/champions and become an ACLJ champion today. Talk to you tomorrow.